Growing the practice is on every practice owner's mind. It kind of seems like this is the hot season for most practice owners. And a hard part of growing is figuring out what needs your time and attention as a practice owner. So, the great thing about today is we're going to spend just a couple minutes walking you through 5 data points, just five. And essentially, with these five major numbers, it should show you exactly what areas of the practice you need to focus on for the next 1 to 3 months, depending on what it reveals. You don't need to look at 50 things. You don't need 100 things. You don't need massive amounts of data on your practice. You should have it as you go deeper into certain things. We'll talk about that. But 5 numbers, 5 data points should give you all of the starting information you need to know where you should focus this fall for the biggest growth levers. So let's equip you as a practice owner and dive in.
Yeah, my one big note for this, guys, as you're hearing some of these numbers, I would recommend with 100,000% certainty that you find ways to get these numbers easily on a regular basis. These should be just like the same amount of ease as you opening up your bank account. You want these numbers on hand because it gives you the pulse of the practice, and you, as the business owner, want to be working on the highest leverage opportunity for your practice. That's how you're going to use your time best. And so I think the first data point that we have to look at, this one might also be one of the easier ones to calculate, is just your total clinical capacity. How many total sessions can your team do on a weekly basis, or monthly, whatever maybe makes most sense for your practice? I like looking at this weekly because it's easy to napkin math this, right? A lot of you guys know you have 3 full-time clinicians and 6 part-time clinicians. A full-time clinician for your practice is going to see 25 sessions in a week, and a part-time person in your practice is going to see 12 sessions a week. And so you just napkin math that out. What's the total there? You grab your total full-time times 25, you grab your total part-time times 12, and you get a maximum available, whatever that number is, because I'm bad at math.
If you have a really loosey goosey policy in your practice where you haven't determined on paper what's full time versus what's part time, that's actually a really great standardizing strategy that you should implement into your practice. You should create clear definitions of who is full time, who is part time, how many sessions a week, and not that you can't let someone who's part time at 12 sessions a week move up to 15 or something like that. But you kind of need how you treat your employees different. Benefits, pay, sometimes percentage splits, all of those things. And it can incentivize part-time employees to move to full-time, and you can hold them accountable to be reaching their clinical capacity then. And then it can also incentivize full-time employees to stay full-time, be consistent, and hold them accountable to what full-time means. And so I think we see that a lot. We've got 15 part-time clinicians and one's doing 3 sessions a week and another one's doing 18. It's like, okay, well, that 18 a week person should probably be pushed to be doing full time. And it just sets the ground for some clear conversations. But total clinical capacity, if you don't know this number, you should be getting some report back from your clinicians, from your admins. Someone has to own the acquisition of finding this number out. And if there aren't rhythms in place, at minimum on a monthly level, if not weekly, then you're not setting up any of your other layers of the practice for success.
Yeah. This is one of those numbers too that just this is the time to shoot off your 6 text messages to just get a confirmation from your clinician on how many they
Yeah.
want to see in a week and just get that number, you know, listed for them and updated accordingly as things change in your practice.
Yeah. We would have just total clinical volume then completed in a week or in a month. And this gets us a couple different pieces, but what this really gets us is a utilization rate. So for easy math, let's say you had 1,000 available sessions to your practice in a week or in a month, and only 700 sessions were completed that week or month. That would be a 70% utilization. And this is a really important number because you are paying, yes, maybe some split or some session fee out the door, but you're paying all of your fixed costs for your team. And so, at minimum, if we have low utilization with your current team, then we're paying a lot of fixed cost for your place, your software, your phones, your real estate, on the list goes. And there's a couple other consequences that Tilio can talk about, but number one is the more full your current team is, the more we're closer to 100% utilization. Yes, the more revenue you'll get, but most importantly, the more profit you'll receive from your current team.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
covered the fixed costs, right? And so from our perspective, we use utilization as sort of like this
Yeah.
fulcrum on a seesaw, if you kind of imagine a world where you have to maybe market more at some times, or maybe you have to hire more at some times, depending on how full you are. And so utilization is just the thing that the seesaw is balancing on. And there's acceptable ranges for cancellations, there's acceptable ranges for reschedulings. And so usually at about 85% utilization is where you kind of land, where your practice or a single clinician is kind of like full. Because you maybe expect like a 10% cancellation rate on a week to week basis, right? If you have 20 scheduled, maybe two of them cancel. And so that's kind of like normal, is what I would say. So right at about 85%, you're like pretty full. Some practice owners, I always say season to taste for utilization, but some practice owners like to hire a little bit earlier. Some like to hire a little bit later. If you're an insurance practice and you need to get your clinicians paneled, maybe hire a little bit earlier. 80% is a good looking number sometimes. And so from that point, from utilization, it leads us into our big point number 3, which is your total lead volume. This isn't your total referral volume. This is your total lead volume. This is how many people that are strangers that are getting in touch with you. And the reason why we focus on strangers here is because referrals is like a small little ideal pool. It's like the kiddie pool. The splashes don't get too big. The sun is nice, but it's not like too hot because you kind of still got the water going. So referrals is like this kiddie pool. But the rest of the world that you can work with all lives in stranger land usually. And this is like a big wave pool. This is like, could be a little bit hot, a little bit cold sometimes. It can get like really wavy. You can get splashed. It's not like the baby pool, okay? So total lead volume is really important because we need to know when we're scaling up our marketing, that we're working with people in this lead pool and that we're working with the
Yeah.
scalable system. So referrals are always great. You're always going to get them. They're going to lower your cost to acquire clients. But leads is the indicator for growth. Leads is the thing that's going to help you scale and move into the next level
We
for your
take it a step
practice.
back outside of total lead volume. If your clinical retention is low, so if you have a 70% utilization rate, there might be two things going on there. One, you might actually have like a client retention issue. And so it's less of a marketing problem and it's more of a clinical retention where your therapists are churning a higher volume of clients out the door. We'll talk about this in a second, but utilization is kind of where you see that number show up. But essentially, if you have a low utilization, it means we probably aren't getting enough lead volume to keep our team full. And so that 85-ish% number is kind of an indication if like we're 85, 95% utilized, time to recruit. If we're 85 to 75% or less utilized, it's time to really look at that lead volume number. We also love to track lead volume by source. So if you're investing in specific channels, Psych Today, Google Ads, search engine optimization, there's ways to track all of those channels using a HIPAA compliant CRM. You don't have to just guess off of what the people say as your intake team asks them. Therapy Flow has one of those for you to utilize to get clear tracking. But then that leaves us to total number of new intakes as number 4 on something you should be tracking. How many of these leads, how many of these strangers turned into new paying clients in that given month?
Yeah, total new intakes is a, an important number to give you a intake close percentage. What is the likelihood that when a lead comes in that they turn into a new client? And so for some practices, like a cash practice, 10 to 20% close rate on leads is good. That's an acceptable range. Trying to get outside of that range, there's diminishing returns, right? If you find that you're higher than that range, if you're like, I'm a cash practice and I'm closing at 40%, there's a couple things that might happen. That's usually a false positive, and it's a false positive on a few fronts. One, that usually means that you're probably just working with referrals. Two, you could be not tracking everyone. Three, it could be that your prices are just way too low, and so that could be an indicator that you need to raise your prices. Or four, is that the situation that you created that allows you to have higher close rates is probably manufactured in a weird way. And so maybe you're doing like a different offer or something unique that just like no one else is doing, and maybe it's
Let's
just
double
working in
down
your
on number
favor.
two,
But for the most part, it's usually
because double down on number
go ahead.
two, which is often what we see happen all the time, which is we aren't tracking our actual total lead volume from every source. The amount of times that we implement a CRM and account for every email, every phone call, every Site Today lead, and we actually get it all in one place, it's like a little jarring for many practice owners because they think that they have a 45 or 65% close rate and it drops to 18% or 22% or 7% with a practice that we recently just did this with. And that's scary, but that's the real number, not the fake number. And you just revealed a massive leaky bucket that you have to get fixed before you're going to scale.
Yeah. And I think these benchmarks are super important, guys, because you need to know if you're kind of um, vaguely in an
Yeah.
industry standard spot. Like whether you're on the low end or you're on the high end, there's kind of like this comfortable zone that we see practices grow in. And this is just one of those huge numbers. Since intake and sales is where your marketing dollars go to die, this is one of those numbers that you need to have benchmarked if you want to make safe and sound investments in your practice, which is in the form of marketing,
There was
right?
a practice that I talked to last week. They're an insurance-based practice. They should be closing probably somewhere between 35, maybe upwards of 60% of their deals, given their area and the volume of insurances that they accept. And they have somewhere between like a 12 and 14% intake close rate. That means they need somewhere between 2 to 4 times the amount of leads from their marketing in order to get the same result as they're currently getting to see some momentum versus the practice that has that 35 to 60% close rate. They need 2 to 3 times less the leads of this current practice. And so sometimes just fixing your intake system and your intake process can cut your marketing costs more than in half, right? And that kind of brings us to then a last number five, clinical retention slash lifetime value. You get them in the same ways, and it's how long on average does one client stay? And you can get a clinical retention average for your entire practice, but eventually, as you get larger, it's going to become really important because clinical retention is driven by people, is driven by your intake team and how well they set clients up for success with the clinicians. And even more so, it's driven by the therapist performing sessions, different therapists on your team based off of their specialty, their skill, their layers. They're going to have different retention rates. And when we know how long someone stays for how many sessions on average, we get a lifetime value. So let's say you have a $117 average session rate. They stay for 12 sessions. That's $1,400 that one client on average spends with you. Now we can run some like cost to acquire client numbers or our net profit margin after our therapist performs services and our overhead. We get the ability to run projections off of this if we want to go to marketing and pump up that lead volume number.
Yeah. I think the most interesting number that I find from lifetime value is getting the actual lifetime value number and then multiply it by maybe your like last year's profit margin. And what you end up with is your lifetime gross profit per client. And so if, for example, we have an example on our newsletter that we ran here. It was $117 sessions, on average for the reimbursement times 12 sessions is 1404 per client. That's how much revenue one client brings in if those are your reimbursements and your average session stays. Now, if you take your profit margins or what your expected profit margins are, and so for maybe like a mid-sized practice, you're at like 15 or 20%, you can take 1404 and multiply it by 0.2 in this case, and you'll get the profit per client. And so what's cool about this number is you know that every time a client comes into your practice, that's how much goes into your pocket. And what you can do is you can benchmark and say, great, I know that if whatever the
280.
number is in this case, I know that one new
280.
client, what was it? 280. Thank you. I know that one client puts $280 in my pocket over their lifetime. So how much am I willing to spend to get one new client? And some people are crazy and they'll be like, well, I would spend 279 to get one new client because that's a new referral source. That's a new client that you can reactivate or have for longer. There's lots of options there. Now you don't have to be crazy and get up to the threshold, right? But there's some ratio that maybe you're okay with spending, and if you're spending more than someone else, you're
Yeah.
going to get the clients. You're going to be getting the clients there. And then, obviously over time you get out of growth mode and you go into more maintenance mode, and maybe you're spending a little bit less because you don't have to go into heavy acquisition. And so all of a sudden your ratios shift a little bit and things look a little bit prettier and everything looks and feels nice. Or you're getting some referrals and it really lowers your costs there. And so I think those are some of my favorite numbers from lifetime
We
value there.
recommend that you have a CEO meeting, a growth meeting on a monthly basis for your practice. And you're going to do three things. You're going to review all of these numbers, your goals, your numbers, where you want to head next. And this happens even in a bigger way, quarterly and annually. You're going to process what kind of the current state of the practice is. What do you do with these numbers when they come out of it? Because one or two big numbers will probably stick out to you. And then you're going to create a response. What action needs to be taken in the next 4 weeks or in the next 12 weeks to address the numbers that you just collected? To kind of go through, if you look at your total clinical capacity and it's really full, well, hiring needs to be a big priority if you want to grow your revenue. You can't grow your revenue if you're stuck at the monthly available billable volume. Sometimes it's actually a tactic to go back to your current team. I spoke on average. There was someone with like 60 clinicians on average. Each clinician was saying they really only wanted to do 12 to 15 sessions. So they kind of had a lot of low part-timers. And I was like, what would it look like to go back to every single person on their team because you're fully utilized and just ask them to increase by 2 sessions a week? That's another 120 sessions on a weekly basis that's available to you. That's about 500 available to you on a monthly basis without incurring any more overhead, any more onboarding costs, any more recruitment costs. Huge growth lever to increase clinical capacity because that was a red flag. And then you just go down the list. Oh man, if our utilization's super low, why? What's the problem? Where do we go? Our lead volume is low or high, right? One or two numbers will stick out to you to review and to create a response. But if you aren't going through these core five, you're going to be probably working on a part of the business that doesn't need your attention.
Best of luck, guys. Keep it simple. I know these maybe seem like in the weed numbers, but
Yeah.
these are like the big ones. These are the big stars and the Big Dipper. This is the thing that makes the picture. And so from here, you can kind of unravel and go deeper into the broken spots. So as long as you're not making it too complicated, this should help you crush or help you clarify, or maybe even help you ask the questions that will grow your practice
Yeah.
fastest.
Capacity without utilization is just potential left on the table. I think I talked to two types of practices, those that their team is massively underutilized, and that's a bummer for you and that's a bummer for them. That is just potential left on the table. They're there. Use them. Even if you don't want to add headcount to your organization, add clinical volume at minimum. And then it goes the other direction. If you have high utilization, so you have low capacity, increase it if you want. See y'all next time.